joining us today. As you know, Cesar Chavez Day is in March, on March 31st. Every year in March, the EPCC Pasos program dedicates a series of events that honor and speak to Cesar Chavez's legacy of service, activism, advocacy, education, and community action. This year we have 5 excellent events that will culminate with a very special guest. Ms. Dolores Huerta will be live with us on April 1st here. We hope that you can join us here in this same virtual space and this same link that got you here today for all 5 events. To start us off on this very special series of events, we have a fabulous speaker today. She will be introduced by Ms. Crystal Roberts, speech professor at EPCC, and she is the lead faculty of the College of the Community Committee. Thank you and enjoy today's presentation. Ms. Roberts.
Hello, hello. I am so excited. I'm overjoyed to be introducing to you one of my favorite people in the whole world, my brilliant, amazingly talented, and exceptional friend, Erica Marin. She I'm just so excited. I've always wanted to bring in Erica as a as a presenter because she's also such a rich storyteller, charismatic, and her stories will just leave you in carcajadas sometimes. So I really I'm so excited to share her experience and her stories with you today. So let me start by telling you a little bit about Miss Marin, or as some in certain circles, if you're of the particularly hip crowd, you know her simply as La Marin. That's quite a title. Erica Marin began her work in collaboration with the El Paso Museum of History as a contractor in the curatorial department. But before her work at the El Paso Museum of History, she worked as an exhibits curator for Las Cruces Museums, and previous to that, she was an independent curator for the Purple Gallery in El Paso, Texas. Miss Marin has a BFA in Art Museum Conservation and an MA in History and Public History. Before her formal education, she was an art maker, and her work primarily focused on identity and memory. Once again, as I mentioned, she's a very talented artist as well. Miss Marin became interested in the curatorial process because she viewed it as an opportunity to express herself through a more multidisciplinary approach. Her current work at the El Paso Museum of History includes overseeing exhibition development and the stewardship of the permanent collection. Together with the museum team, she aids in the development of ideas and themes for exhibitions and educational and cultural programming. Now, this was something I found very surprising, and please please excuse me if I repeat it many times. Miss Marin is the first Mexican American woman to become a curator for the El Paso Museum of History. Right now in 2021, La Marin is the first Chicana curator of the El Paso Museum of History. So if you are sitting at home, I hope you're yelling up in the air and sending a grito and clapping your hands, because that's amazing. That's amazing stuff right there. Most recently, she worked closely with the department leadership in developing memorialization initiatives for the August 3rd tragedy that hit us all in El Paso. Last year, she was selected as a 2020 National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures NALAC Leadership Institute Fellow. Ms. Marin's long-term goals include continuing to work to expand access to museums to the larger Borderlands community. Thank you very much for being here, Erica. I'm so happy to be presenting you, to introduce you today to our amazing Pasos and El Paso Community College and El Paso community. And we look forward to your words. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. You make me sound really nice. I'm really excited to present today. I'm really honored to be part of EPCC's El Paso Strong Si Se Puede series. thank you and your steering committee for inviting me. This is exciting. It's exciting for many reasons. It's exciting as part of my personal journey and experience. It's also exciting as a scholar and historian and a person that loves to share stories. I want to talk to you today about a history of community action in El Paso, Texas, which extends beyond the 1960s and 1970s. Arguably, people of color have been fighting for their rights and their rights to exist, and for a very long time, I mean, for centuries, since European contact. But we will kind of pretty much we're going to keep it to the 20th century, and I want to talk a little bit about the ways in which community action took place here on the border. What are the roots of community action in El Paso? It is not just about one moment in time. It's expansive and it changes over time too, right? So we're going to look a little bit at the beginning of labor unions, but just a little, we're going to touch a little bit on that. We're going to touch a little bit about Chicano civil rights and how that fed into what happened post-1970s and social justice movements, because the Chicano civil rights didn't just happen then and end there. It continues today. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what community action in the early 20th century looked like. As we know, during the Industrial Revolution, unionizing became a factor in the late 19th, early 20th century. In most cases, it was men that were forming unions, and women were not really part of this. As some historians might recall, there was such a thing as a man's wages and women's wages. It was recognized that there was a disparity in wages, and that was acceptable in that part of during that time. So here it's really interesting to note that women led the vanguard of unionizing as early as 1919. In October of 1919, frustrated by the unequal treatment of women, women workers at the Acme Laundry Company came together with representatives from the American Federation of Labor, and they organized a local laundry workers union. More than 200 female factory workers walked off the job one day, and after community pressure, and within days, nearly 600 workers joined the picket lines and mobilized to support the women laundry workers. So that was as early as 1919. Now, moving forward, labor unions became increasingly important during, right after World War II, and with the working class, because as many of you know, many of our grandfathers or fathers came back from World War II, and they went straight into the workforce. They might have used the GI Bill or not, but definitely most of them comprised the workforce in the blue collar area that involved electrical workers, that involved plumbers, that involved rail workers. In my own family, we have that tradition of unionizing and working in the railroad and such, and also to this day with the electric company. So it was always part of a working class tradition to join labor unions. And being that we are also a blue county and have been since then, mostly Democratic, we have had a lot of support politically for unions during that time. So that was one way in which we organized previous to the larger civil rights movement that became so synonymous with the 60s and 70s. So I want to take you to a little bit of what we know about the farm workers movement of the 1960s. In 1965, here in El Paso, supporters for farm workers picketed at the labor agency in downtown El Paso, located behind El Cine Colón. This picket line supported Cesar Chavez and the laborers during the Delano Great Boycott. Not only did they picket in front of this labor agency, but they also picketed throughout the city at the local Safeways, which was a grocery store chain back then. One of the notable organizers for this was a Mr. Jesus Chuy Chavez, who lived in Segundo Barrio. He was a notable local organizer who brought attention to the plight of the farm workers, as he had been out there working as well. So let's talk a little bit about what happened after that. So this is a good place to pick up the conversation about the 1960s as it relates closer to those larger movements throughout the country. And El Paso community organizing took form through student and worker-led groups. These groups advocated for visibility and equity in relation to issues such as workers' rights, fair and dignified housing, access to healthcare, education and choice of language, justice in response to police brutality, and promotion of cultural pride, and of course, migration. Oops, I skipped a slide ahead. So part of that was it was about forming these groups. And who were these people? Who were the groups that started coming together and organizing? Well, there were a few key events that that happened that I'd like to talk about first just a little bit. In 1967, the first Chicano counter conference was held, and it was in response to Johnson's Conference on Mexican American Affairs. As you know, we had the treaty, the Chamizal Treaty, where the United States went ahead and returned part of the Chamizal area to Mexico. And during that time, Lyndon B. Johnson and the president of Mexico, Díaz Ordaz, met, and they did their diplomatic thing, and from there it was about, well, what's happening with the Mexican American affairs down here along the border, because there was civil unrest, and those that were invited to join or to participate in those discussions weren't necessarily people from the barrio. They weren't grassroots people. It was mostly white men talking about what they knew about Mexican American affairs. So the first Chicano conference was held in response to that. One notable person that came to visit and to participate in that was Mr. Bert Corona from California, who was a very well-known labor organizer during that time. Not only did Chicano youth and activists participate here, but they also participated in other parts of the country, because we did not exist in a silo. We were very much interconnected with other Chicano civil rights movements in California, New Mexico, the Rio Grande Valley. And so one of the activities that happened was a Chicano Youth Conference in Denver, Colorado in 1969 at the Crusade for Justice building. Also, too, another notable event that I just feel needs to be mentioned here is in 1969, there was outrage over a tenement fire that killed a family on Mesa Street. Now, what's interesting about this particular moment is that it was a little bit of a watershed moment, because it not only activated youth and local organizers, it also activated families from Segundo Barrio, older women, grandmothers, children, fathers, they all came out to protest the shoddy condition that slumlords had them living in. So again, who were these people? Who were the youth organizations that gave rise to future leaders? Well, groups such as Mecha, UTEP, also Maya, which is a little less known, but again, we're trying to uncover histories that are a little bit obscured here, so I think it's important. Maya was Mexican American Youth Association, and they had a strong presence during this time, especially in Segundo Barrio. MAPA and other organizations created these leaders. Later, some of the members of some of these groups formed a group called Partido De Los Pobres. I think it's important to mention here this particular group because I've looked through a lot of scholarship that includes journal articles, whatever I could find, books, any kind of publication, and I have found little to no mention of this particular group. And I'll explain why this group is so important, but some of the members from this group were James Aguirre, Mario Chavarria, Paco Orozco, Salvador Valcorta, Chacha Marin, Pat Marin Duran, Daniel Solis, Guillermo Glenn, Cupina de Santiago, Sara Pacheco, Juan Contreras, and Cecilia Rodriguez. It's important to mention them because they should not be lost to history. I'm not going to retrieve one. I'm going to go back one more slide. So part of what they did here was not only did they distribute newsletters, they also rallied for protest and community solidarity. They created a hot lunch program in Segundo Barrio that helped the elderly. And most importantly, I feel that it's important to mention that they conceptualized cultural spaces, charter schools, improvements in housing and healthcare, as well as coalitions that advocated for workers' rights and migration rights. That's especially important to note because we wonder now, how did all these future organizations come about? Well, they came about through conversations here. And those conversations transcended into the 1970s. And we'll talk a little bit about important points in the 1970s movements. So some of us may be familiar with FARA strike of 1972. As you know, El Paso at that moment was known as the jeans capital of the world. So I'm going to take a little excerpt here from Sites of Conscience. This was written by Dr. Yolanda Chavez Leiva. In 1972, 4,000 workers went on strike at FARA Incorporated, also in El Paso, demanding representation by a union. FARA's labor force, almost all Latino and 85% women. In addition to the strike, the women implemented a successful boycott of FARA pants. In 1974, the National Labor Relations Board ordered FARA to re-employ strikers who had been fired, permit the union, and implement a new contract that included pay raises and other changes. Now, this was not the only factory that had to contend with a push from the community to improve labor conditions. There was also Western Packing, there was Levi's, there was a whole corridor along Texas Avenue of sweatshops that had to contend with the community and organizing. In the same year as the FARA strike, Chicano Studies, people fought for Chicano Studies at the University of Texas at El Paso. They organized a takeover of the Administration Services building. This was in response to the university's rejection of demands by students for a Chicano Studies program and more visibility of Mexican American access to relevant education. Also, just so you know, and it's online, in 2017, graduate students from the Department of History at UTEP opened up an exhibition called Viva la Causa, Forging UTEP's 21st Century Demographic. And it was held at the Centennial Museum. But you can look it up in the archives, and it's pretty interesting. It's amazing, actually. Another area that the community responded to was police brutality. In this case, it was, this is a photograph of demanding justice for Danny Vasquez, who was the victim of police brutality and who was killed here in El Paso. And this was in 1979. This included also cross collaborations in other parts of the country. One was for Santos Rodriguez, who was 12 years old in Dallas, Texas, who was killed by a cop who was 29 years old playing Russian roulette with his gun. There was also plenty of support for the freeing of Ismael Gonzalez in California. And these were some of the ways in which we collaborated across geographic boundaries. So some of the organizing led to the creation of social justice and nonprofit organizations. One of them was Campaña por la Preservación del Barrio. That was housing that was led by Carmen Felix. There was also La Fe Clinic, and that was led by Nina Cordero, who was founder of the clinic in the early 60s and one of the women who organized and sought for health access. And it initially was created through the church, and it was called Father Ram Clinic. So that wasn't the only organization. There was also La Mujer Obrera, and here's part of the excerpt that I was speaking earlier from Dr. Chavez Leiva. And in the wake of the 1972 fair strike, a group of displaced women garment workers, along with Chicana activists, founded La Mujer Obrera in 1981. 40 years later, LMO has continued to challenge the idea that Mexican heritage women are an endless source of cheap labor. La Mujer Obrera is still in existence today and still advocates for workers' rights. We also have to talk about Centro de Trabajadores Agrícolas Fronterizos, who were also formed in the early 1980s with a mission of helping and advocating for migrant farm workers. In other words, after the 1970s, work did not stop. We still saw how those early activists continued to do the work throughout the 80s. At this point, they had organized and created these nonprofits, and where they helped in whatever sector they took over, whether it was housing, migrant farmer workers' rights, healthcare. And so moving on to the late 80s and 90s, we have one particular group, which is also, I don't think yet in leadership, that I'd like to explore a little more. It's called El Congreso Chicano. And El Congreso Chicano was a group formed by older Chicano mentors and young activists. They continued to advocate for Chicano visibility in the El Paso landscape, in education, and continued to support actions of solidarity with international groups such as the EZLN, the Zapatistas in Chiapas, the FMLN, that's the Salvadoran leftist group in Central America and across the United States, amplifying the message of human rights and dignity for all. Today, we still have several of these organizations, and we have others. We have the Border Network for Human Rights, which advocates for immigration rights. We have Paso del Sur, that is an organization that advocates for anti-gentrification efforts, and La Mujer Obrera, workers' rights, Centro Campesino, again, farm workers' rights, Borderland Rainbow Center for LGBTQ plus community, and Familias Unidas del Chamizal, that advocate for environment and education and the betterment of in and along the Chamizal corridor. And I have a comment in there, how sad that we are still fighting these issues. Yes, we are still fighting these issues as we did 40, 50 years ago, and we have to continue to fight. But I cannot say that we have not had any progress. History shows that we at least have learned to organize with some form of staying power. And so la lucha sigue, and I'll leave you with the thought que sí se pudo y sí se puede. Gracias. Do I have any questions? Anybody want to share? I'd also like to give a special thanks to Antonio Chacha Marin and Pat Duran for their oral histories.
Thank you very much, Erica. I'm not sure if we can do this now. Can we? Patricia, you'll tell me. Can we open up our mics and clap? Is that a possibility?
Yes, ma'am. I can open up the, you mean for the participants?
Yes, please.
Okay, just a moment.
So in just a couple of minutes, let the excitement build. You'll be able to clap. And
it's ready.
Okay, so everyone open up your mics. Let's clap. Let's thank each other. So thank you very much for your presentation today. We're so excited to have you here. We're also so excited to have Pat Duran here. That's what's very exciting too. You mentioned a little bit about having these artifacts as part of another exhibition. Can you tell us about that?
So we have been collecting photographs and flyers and ephemera from these times, and I've been slowly digitizing some of what my dad shares, and I'm doing that because I would really like to create a repository that I can share access with a community with. So I'd like to be able to digitize these things and have them open for people to see and use as they see fit, because it's really important that history is accessible to all.
Excellent, and agreed. It is very important that history is accessible to all, and also that we honor our elders, honor the people that came before us and the struggles they fought, the sacrifices they've made. That's always incredibly important that we do. I'd like to open up for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or open your mic and let us know what your question is. You can also write your question in the chat if you don't feel like talking, and we can read it out for you. So this is our time. We've also got a couple questions. Oh, our first question is, what inspired you to pursue a career in history?
Well, I can't say that it was necessarily a very straightforward way of going about things. It just so happened that this is where I ended up in a good way. I was interested in getting a master's in history because I wanted to understand more the kind of art that I wanted to create. I didn't want to just create things just for the sake of it. I wanted context. I needed context. I needed depth in what I was doing, and it, strangely enough, led to this place where I really enjoyed not only researching and writing, but I also enjoyed the idea of sharing stories in this format. So I do feel that I get a lot of creative license here. I get to do a lot with my creativity, but I also get to express something more. I get to share information. I'm in a place where I can actually work to make this kind of information, this kind of education accessible. And for people that are interested in history as a career, you know, it's not just a place, you don't just have to go into academia per se. You can, there's other avenues. I saw a question pop up, but I could not see who it was from.
Oh, it's from Victoria. She's asked, oh, do you want to say it, Victoria? Hello? Or if someone else, oh, okay, she can't talk right now. She's asking, do you think children in schools are not taught enough about this kind of history?
No, I don't think they are. I think from my understanding, it's still about Christopher Columbus, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, the presidents, what happened, what are the significant events surrounding these presidents, and can you regurgitate what I just told you? So that's not very exciting for children, right?
That was great. That can you regurgitate what I just told you? I think someone was trying to open up their mic. Did I cut someone off? Oh, Victoria responded, it's not exciting at all, especially for those who live in this city. We have another question from Natasha Norman. How do you balance working for a city institution and still being passionate about the political issues that affect you? Do you feel like you have to censor or be neutral when presenting histories?
History is not neutral, and as a historian, I have an obligation to the community to share information with them, and I think my ethics as a human being come first. So that's very important to me to share not only my experience, but the experience of the community. And as long as I do that, as long as I stay true to the community and to their stories, and share their stories and give them access to their own stories, and yeah, just open up access, and I think that I'm doing the job that I'm supposed to do.
Thank you. Vanessa has a question for us. As someone who is going into education, how can I teach this? I agree. I agree. So that sounds like she's agreeing with the messages sent here. I don't remember learning anything about Chicano, Mexica, American history. Everything I learned came from my parents.
I think what we're seeing here, and I'm not sure I'm not really familiar with what K through 12 looks like now. My only point of reference is my K through 12 experience, which was a way long time ago, right? But my experience was maybe at the end of the textbook, when we're already in 20th century. There's like maybe half a page or a quarter page of Farm Workers Union, of Cesar Chavez, and that was supposed to be enough to satisfy what happened during the 1960s and 70s. And there was also another half page of the Black civil rights movement, and that was that. So I think that people here probably don't know a whole lot. I do think that it's warranted to have uh, an extra class throughout K through 12 to teach people living along the borderlands history.
Excellent. Yes, especially along the border. We received some questions before, unless we have any other questions. Okay, we received some questions before the presentation. Um, have you experienced racism or sexism as a woman of color in your field?
Perhaps not yet. To my knowledge, I would say to my knowledge, perhaps not yet. Not in front of me, but we'll see. I think in the field, in the museum field, I think it's pretty prevalent that people of color are not really given the same opportunities, or we do not have the same opportunities. But I talk that on a larger scale and more about the museum field in general here in the United States.
Excellent. We have another question. Unless is that someone's mic opening up? Okay. Once again, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to open up your mic and ask your question. I'm hearing an echo, so I'm just I'm hoping that's not anyone else. Okay, we did, like I mentioned, we did have a few other questions that we received before the presentation today, and so they have a lot to do with who you are, Marin, and what you've experienced. So this one I thought was really interesting too. What do you think is the biggest misconception that young people have about history?
I think I think it comes from K through 12. How are you going to get excited if you don't see yourself reflected in history? How are you going to get excited about men in white wigs if they have nothing to do with your own lived experience, even in your little 8-year-old body and your own lived experience, right? You don't connect. And history is about connecting. And I think that that's the responsibility we have as educators or presenters here along the border, is to it is exciting. History is exciting because it's about people. It's about us, and we connect with each other.
Ha! Sorry, mic problems. That's so interesting that you say that. We have a question, but before, and I'll read it out. Um, I, when you mentioned, not being able to relate, right? We want to see someone that looks like us, and we want it to be in the right place. And when you mentioned that there were white men talking about Mexican American affairs, right, during your presentation, when
Mm-hmm.
those were the first kind of activists, right? What what is there to say about that, right? Because we see that repeating itself over and over and over again, right? What do you think about those situations? Are they proper allies? What's there to be said in that regard? What
I
do you
think
think?
we're a long way from finding proper allies there. I think that it's about passing the mic and giving people of color, giving women the opportunity to speak for themselves, uh, uh, men, brown and black people to speak for themselves, and not I'm going to represent you because you're the best shot. I'm the best shot you have.
Mm. Yes. We've got some questions, and exactly, right there, because yes, let's all do this together, but also pass the mic. Like I said, pass the mic. We've got a couple more questions. I'm very excited. Natasha Norman asks, what do you feel is the importance in showing local historical events in the context of the entire United States?
I think that we can relate everything that's happening here is maybe happening somewhere else on a larger or smaller scale. We need to be able to connect the dots. Look, this is happening in El Paso, Texas in 2012, and this happened in Baltimore, Maryland to this predominantly working class African American community. And when we start connecting, then we start understanding that we're not alone and that we can continue to fight if we galvanize, because we're not alone. We need to create those collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And that includes in representing and talking about history. So if we're exhibiting something, how do you make the connections? Well, find something that you can connect it to. Connect to something that happened in another town so that you start seeing, so that people start understanding.
Yeah. So, absolutely. I think right before our quarantine hit, I was trying to emphasize to my students. I said El Paso is the center of the world right now, right? Because we had so much going on, right? And unfortunately, some of it was devastating. But it's making those connections and making others realize, this is happening here, this is happening other places. We're all in this together. Um, there's another question regarding the internships at the El Paso History Museum. Is there opportunities for our youth?
Uh, yeah, right. Obviously, right now we're in a very weird time. We're in a difficult time due to the pandemic, but I do encourage people to reach out and to contact us for opportunities. I'm happy to provide an email for that as well.
Awesome.
And you can do it for your class, for class credit. However, we can figure something out. But I would love to see more students come in and be interested in what we're doing there. They might find themselves on a path. Just this past week, I wrote a letter of recommendation for an intern we had 2 years ago, who is applying for a fellowship at the Smithsonian, who decided she wanted a career in museum studies because she just really enjoyed working there. So
Wow.
it could take you on a path that you really, really like.
That's exciting. That's really at the Smithsonian. That's really exciting. I feel like I should mention this because Vanessa wrote in the chat that she loved the comments that you were making, and mentioned, how are you going to get excited about people you can't connect with, right? And I think a big part of that statement was the people in the white wigs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was an excellent statement, man. Oh, I feel a little silly bringing it up, right? But it wasn't until Hamilton was portrayed by black and brown people that I really started to get into that history, right? So I don't
Yeah,
know. If
you can't really get into it.
right? Yeah, because like I try to picture him, and I picture him in my head, and he's Lin-Manuel Miranda, and but in real life he was this white pasty dude, and I just don't see him as a tomcat like they're trying to portray him, and it's just really funny, right? So it's important to get get a diverse people in front, and so we're talking about our story.
Sure.
Um, Okay, Carlos Gonzalez is asking, what resources in the city can you recommend where we can further our knowledge and understanding of Chicano history and culture?
Well, we are working on that repository. We have digi.org, which is our community curated archive, and anyone, because we are all community, is invited to upload images, to that, and video clippings to that repository, and we will share them. We are still working on that aspect of it. Right now we are closed, but we do have a few virtual tours. We have the Low and Slow exhibit, which is a lowrider exhibition, and that one is available as a virtual tour. You can find it through our Facebook page, El Paso Museum of History. So, that's part of our Chicano heritage. That's part of our culture. And so we have that up right now. Also, too, there's pieces in our permanent exhibit, Changing Past, the precursors of the Chicano movement, that being World War II, the Bracero project. So I really encourage people to come in and check it out. We try to include not only Mexican American people, but we also try to include everyone that made up part of this region. That includes the Black community, that includes the Chinese community, and much more.
I just clicked on Untitled and got really excited. I know that when I visited the Paso Museum of History with my family, that was one of the things we've talked about. You can open it up, you can click on something, touch it, and open it up, and you've got this beautiful, rich history of people with their family pictures, and it's just amazing. So we had a part of the Museum of History wall at our campus for some time, and it was always very exciting to look at. And I hope that our students take more advantage. So I've got that link. I've got that link up on the chat. Apparently, I'm not loud enough, and I apologize. I hope that everyone will take some time to take a look at that link of the digi.org, and maybe if you have a parent, and you've got some family with some really great pictures, you can post them up there as well. So that would be really exciting. I've got a question, and I thought that this would be interesting because I'm very excited about Chicanx and different historical figures. Which female historical figures do you wish more young people knew about?
Female historical figures I wish seen here in the region or outside of it?
Yes, here in the
Here?
region. Yes,
Here?
because I get real
I'd
excited.
like them to know a little bit more about Teresita Urrea, La Santa de Cabora. I'd like them to know a little bit more about her. I'd like them to know a little bit more about the Chicanas of the 1960s, 70s, and they're alive today still. So they are historical figures. I'd like them to know a little bit more about some of the women that went into politics, like and attorneys and people like Carmen Rodriguez. I think her story is
Yes.
very interesting. Also, Norma Chavez. I'd like them to know about some of the founders, like Carmen Felix. I'd like them to know about Cecilia Rodriguez. I'd like them to know about my own mother, because I think she's a historical figure and she's pretty cool. But I'd like them to know about several people that are probably not gone yet, because we are always making history. History is all happening in the present, and that's something that's really important to know and to acknowledge.
Absolutely, right? It's not just history, it's her story too. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm always getting so excited about. We have a comment. Vanessa is saying, I love sharing powerful women with my daughters, and especially our personal stories. Um, so I thank you, because Erica, I think that you're one of those women making history. And so I thank you for being here today, and and sharing a little bit about you and inspiring our students as they see a Chicana being the first Chicana curator at the El Paso Museum of History, right? So someone who is from here, who looks like me and is telling my story, right? Thank you very much, Erica, for telling the stories that you've shared today. We were so lucky to have you. I'd like to open this up to any last questions or maybe even lasting thoughts you'd like to take with you, something you'd like to share. So just put it in the chat. We've got a couple thank yous.
Erica, this is your mother. I just want to
Hi, Mom.
thank you for taking me down memory lane. I really appreciate it. I'm proud of you, mija. Love you.
Love you, Mama.
I'm not crying, you're crying. Oh, that was really wonderful. It was very sweet and amazing. And so we know you're busy, and we thank you for taking time out of your schedule to speak with us, to speak with our students, to tell the stories of our families, to tell the history of El Paso and the border, to tell the history of others taking community action to raise up and inspire others. And I want you to know today that you've raised our spirits, you've inspired us, and you've educated us so much. So we're all very grateful to you. Let's open our mics and say bravo, say thank you, say viva one more time.
Bravo!
Bravo.
Bravo!
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done,
you so
Erica.
much.
You're awesome.
Hey, Mama.
Thank you,
Standing
Mama.
ovation. Standing ovation.
Thank you.
And we hope that this isn't the last time. We'd love to see you again and again, telling more of these stories. I know that I get real excited about the Wild West and females in the Wild West. So maybe more of that, but definitely thank you so much for telling us about community action today. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me. Y'all have a good day. Good evening.
Goodness, I couldn't get my mic working. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to Patricia and to Carlos and Lucia for helping everyone put this all together. We hope that you'll come back with us again when we inspire more women on Monday for another event for Pasos. It is our all-female panel discussion, educadora luchadora. We're hoping to see you again on Monday, 5:20, same link. Thank you and come back soon.